guy. So I really, really enjoyed putting this one together
Like
and
Bobby
learning about
McGee?
Frank McGee. What?
Like Bobby McGee?
No.
Janis Joplin? You're a Joplin fan?
It's the first thing I thought of.
Oh, yeah. Good reference there, Louis. Like it.
Thanks.
I could have done a whole episode on this guy. Honestly, this is like the most fun and the most interesting player I think I've ever researched in the entire time doing this show. Like this story is nutty with a capital N. Okay, let's learn about Frank. Francis Clarence McGee was born on my birthday, November 4th, 1882, and lived until just 33 years old, dying on September 16th, 1916. He was born in Ottawa, Ontario, but died in France, and we'll get to that shortly. Played with the Ottawa Hockey Club from 1903 to 1906. Now, here's where we get into the nuttiness. A couple of years prior to joining the Ottawa Hockey Club, he suffered an eye injury while playing hockey and became blind in one eye, earning the nickname One-Eyed Frank McGee. Hang on.
That's so cold.
Yeah.
After retiring from hockey in 1906, he worked for the Canadian federal government and then enlisted in the Canadian Army during the First World War. He'd rise to the rank of lieutenant while fighting with the Canadian Expeditionary Force. And unfortunately, Frank McGee would die in battle in France when an artillery shell landed next to him. This is a very quick bio with the short life of Frank McGee. Now, why should you care about him as a Hockey Hall of Famer? Well, One-Eyed Frank McGee was a prolific scorer, played both center and rover position. Now, this is the first time rover has come up, and so I want to spend a little bit of time learning about it and defining it. So in the early days of hockey, there were actually 7 positions, not 6. There was a rover, 3 forwards, 2 defensemen, and a goalie. The rover did not have a set position and roamed the ice at will, going where needed, much as a midfielder in association with like soccer might. As the skill levels of players increased, the need to have a rover decreased. Shortly after it was formed in 1910, the predecessor to the NHL, the National Hockey Association, decided to exclude the rover, and then the NHL did the same when it formed in 1917. Kind of sounds like the center a little bit today, too. Like maybe they combined the center and the rover position. Okay, now back to Frank McGee, the prolific scorer. He once scored 14 goals in one Stanley Cup game.
What?
One-Eyed Frank McGee scored 14 goals. And I think, Jay, what you wrote in the notes here, he had, 8 in a row in game, what?
He had 8 goals in that 14 goal game. He had 8 goals in a row, and he scored them within 8 minutes and 20 seconds. So basically almost a minute.
Yep.
Wow. Now, I haven't seen Shane Pinto do that, Phil.
No, of course not. But there has to be circumstance for something like that to happen. Like if we had a time machine and we went back, are they all like laughing and they're friends? They're like, "Oh, Frank, like let him have another one." Like I have to believe there's.
Phil, we've been looking at these guys for like a couple months now.
Yeah,
this game was like a gladiator sport. Frank lost an eye. What do you mean laughing and chuckling?
I don't know.
They were clubbing each other to death with their.
It's hard to picture one man scoring 8 goals in a row every minute, or like it just. There has to be collusion, right? Like I don't know.
Well, you should come watch me play. I'll show you.
Yeah, like Vladimir Putin, eh? Didn't he score like 11 goals in a period? Attaboy, Vlad.
Yeah. I think the hard part, though, with him is, I mean, he didn't have an issue with lower body injury. He lost an eye and played. So what's up with Shane Pinto and this lower body injury thing?
Don't even get me started.
Yeah, Phil.
Phil.
Let's talk about Shane Pinto in a little bit. Mm-hmm. He also scored 5 or more goals in 8 separate occasions in games. Over his brief career in Ottawa, so in the regular season, he scored 71 goals in 23 games played. That's a lot. And in 20 Stanley Cup games, he scored only 60 goals during his career. That's pretty impressive. He was a member of the famed Silver Seven, helping lead Ottawa to 4 consecutive Stanley Cups. Every year he was with the team, they won the Stanley Cup. From what I read, too, it was really Frank's arrival to the team that ushered in the Silver Seven era. Is that what? No, you said that you knew a little bit about him before we started, Phil. What was your understanding or recollection of Frank McGee?
Not much at all. I know very little about him. He's just one of the quote unquote founding fathers of our Silver Seven. He's like almost everyone we've talked about. There's a plaque at the Canadian Tire Center.
McGee was slightly shorter than the average Canadian man, but he was noted for being strong relative to his size and having a physical, at times rough style of play. Frank Patrick, a contemporary of McGee, described him as this: even better than they say he was. He had everything: speed, stick handling, scoring ability, and was a punishing checker. He was strongly built, but beautifully proportioned. Oh, there's a compliment. And he had almost an animal rhythm. What's that mean?
What does that mean? Like he's hunting?
I don't know. Yeah. Quite the compliment, though. Jeez, I wish someone would compliment me like that. I'll take that.
Josh, you have such an animal rhythm.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, okay.
I think
yeah,
Phil has an animal rhythm. That's what I would say, but I don't even know what it means. Okay, on to Frank McGee's hobby market. He's another one of these guys, again, whose hockey career predated hockey cards. It's the 1910 C56 set that Phil's taken a keen interest in. That's really has been accepted by the hobby as the first hockey card set. So Frank Patrick, who just gave the lovely quote about our guy One-Eyed Frank, is card number 1 on that set. Making his rookie, Frank Patrick's, we're talking about basically the first ever player hockey card. But again, that's 1910, and Frank McGee retired in 1906. There's been quite a few tribute cards that have been popped up over the years, but I can only find 14 total sales of any Frank McGee card letter sales history. It's kind of sad. I mean, this guy has like a crazy legacy. Loses an eye playing hockey.
They've got to have relatives. Don't these guys? We're not digging hard enough. Like Frank McGee's got to have a great grandson out there with some cool stuff in a tickle trunk.
Maybe. Yeah,
Bobby,
and you know, yeah. It's kind of sad. I think that there's not more to celebrate and collect in our hobby for some of these guys, especially with the hockey legacy like a Frank McGee has, which is been, I guess, somewhat lost at this point. So there he is, your Hall of Famer Frank McGee. What stood out to you guys about our brief look at his life and career?
When men were men. The guy lost an eye and he's still playing hockey. I got a guy who stubbed his toe last week and he wanted to go home early for raking. Leave. Oh, yeah. I like how tough they were back then, and I like how they maximized their time and they didn't sit around and stare at a wall, and they lived, man. It sounds, they all died young from war or tuberculosis, but these boys lived, and I don't think Frank McGee was any different.
Jay, you had some notes you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned in your discussion of him, the way he died, obviously it was in wartime, but more specific, they say that an artillery shell actually landed next to him and they never found a body. I mean, you talk about, like you said, tough guys. That's tough guy right there.
Vaporized.
But the big thing that got me was you talked about his goals, stats, and I did some digging, and he only played 4 seasons, as you mentioned. But if you look at his stats, in the first season, he scored 2.3 goals per game. And then in the playoffs, he scored 1.75 goals per game. Second season, 3 goals per game. Almost 3 goals in the playoffs. The third year, 1.6 goals per game. And then in the playoffs, he scored 4.5 goals per game. And then his last season, he scored 4 goals per game in the regular season and almost 3 goals per game in the playoffs. I mean, who's doing that nowadays? Connor McDavid? Nobody. So that guy, like you said, that guy needs to be on some kind of appreciation list somewhere.
Couldn't the NHL at an All-Star game do those holograms? They could do holograms of these guys without helmets, and I don't know, there's something, some type of a forced tribute. Be like, no, you're going to learn about these guys because they're our game's founding fathers. There's there's an art to it. There's something there. Come on, Gary, do something.
You got to make it cool and relevant, and and not like it's not like history class, right? But yeah, I don't know. It's too bad too that there wasn't video footage back then. Wouldn't it be amazing to watch one of those games from the early 1900s and see some sort of footage of it? I mean, let alone there's not even any pictures.
AI can do it soon. Yeah, we totally can for sure. We're close.
Why don't they put these guys like this? We're always putting like these retro young guns and all that. Why don't they put guys like this on a set, or some kind of insert with the stats so we can all
I don't think
see a
it'd
cool
work.
design? You
I don't
think
think
so?
it'd work. I don't know. I just I don't want that.
Yeah.
I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I don't know how to explain. Yes, I agree with you, Jay, but I have to be honest here. I probably wouldn't want that in any of my upper deck sets unless they did it with like,
What if they did like a tie-in cards like Brady Kachuk and like Frank McGee, like some sort of like really cool, rare.
it'd have to be done well. I have a Patrick Waugh card with an old guy, and I'm like, ugh, like it has to be done tastefully, maybe sexy. It's got to be sexy,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, very cool guy to learn about. So really enjoying doing this series.